You won't need these. The words came before anyone understood what they meant, spoken low, steady, almost lost in the dry Texas wind. The sound of chains dragging across hard ground had been the only rhythm until then, a dull scrape that followed each step the women took as they climbed down from the back of the truck. West Texas, September 1944. The air stretched wide and empty, the sky too big for anything to hide beneath it. Dust hung in the sunlight, turning everything a muted gold. 8 German women stood in a line, their boots planted carefully, as if the ground itself might shift beneath them. The metal around their ankles caught the light, dull and cold, each link moving just enough to remind them it was still there. Elsa Weber kept her eyes forward. She had learned that somewhere between the train ride and the first camp, that stillness was safer than reaction. She had been a nurse once, in a clean white uniform, hands steady over wounds that had nothing to do with her. Now her hands rested at her sides, fingers slightly curled, her body conserving energy in ways she no longer noticed. The chains were heavier than they looked. Not unbearable. Just enough to change the way a person walked. Just enough to remind them they were no longer in control of their own movement. A man stood near the fence line, hat low, shoulders squared by years of work rather than rank. Jack McKenna had seen prisoners before. Hundreds of them, moving through fields, fixing fences, hauling water under the same sun that now pressed down on everyone equally. But this was different. Not because they were women. Not because they were German. Something else. Something quieter. He watched as one of them shifted her weight too quickly. The chain caught. Her foot didn't clear the ground. She stumbled forward, not dramatically, not enough to draw attention from the guards, but enough to break the careful rhythm she had been holding onto. For a moment she didn't move. Not because she was hurt. Because she was deciding whether she was allowed to move. The world held still with her. No one laughed. No one spoke. The guards stood as they had been standing, rifles resting easy there. Expressions unchanged. Procedure had a way of making moments like this disappear before they fully formed. Jack didn't move either. Not right away. He had learned that decisions made too quickly often belonged to habit, not thought. And habit said this was normal. Standard transport protocol. Temporary. Necessary. But something in the way the woman remained on the ground, upright now, but not fully standing, cut through that explanation. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defiance. It was uncertainty. The kind that settles in when a person no longer knows the boundaries of their own freedom. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faint smell of dry grass and engine oil. Jack exhaled, slow, deliberate. Then he stepped forward. One step. Then another. The distance between them closed without urgency, without hesitation. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see her face clearly now. Dirt traced along her cheek. Her eyes stayed lowered, not out of submission, but out of discipline. He had seen that before too. In men who had lost everything but refused to show it. He looked down at the chain, then back at her. The metal glinted again in the sunlight. For a second, nothing happened. Then he spoke, quiet enough that it almost felt like the words were meant for himself. You won't need these. And just like that, something invisible shifted, though no one could yet say what it was. The words did not echo, but they stayed, suspended in the air like dust that refused to settle. No one moved at first. The guards glanced at each other, not confused, not alarmed, just uncertain in a way that protocol did not account for. One of them shifted his stance, boots pressing into the dry ground, as if waiting for a correction that did not come. Jack did not raise his voice. He did not repeat himself. He simply stood there, his gaze steady, not on the guards, but on the chain itself, as though the answer had already been decided long before the question had been spoken. A second passed. Then another. Time stretched thin in the heat. Finally, one of the guards stepped forward, keys already in his hand, the small ring catching the light as it moved. The sound came first. A soft, metallic click. Then another. Each one precise, controlled, almost careful. The kind of sound that did not belong to punishment, but to something being undone. Elsa felt the tension in her body before she understood what was happening. The pressure around her ankles loosened, not all at once, but in a gradual release that her mind struggled to follow. The weight she had adjusted to, measured her steps around, built her balance upon, suddenly shifted. The final latch opened. The chain fell. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to be heard. It landed against the ground with a dull, final note, as if marking the end of something that had never been meant to last. She did not step away. Not immediately. Her feet remained exactly where they had been, muscles still braced for resistance that was no longer there. Around her, the same silence held. One by one, the other women felt it too. The unlocking. The absence. The unfamiliar lightness that did not feel like freedom yet, only the removal of something they had come to expect. One of them shifted slightly, testing the space between steps. Another straightened her back, just a fraction, as if remembering a posture she had not used in months. No one spoke. Words would have required certainty, and there was none. Jack stepped back once the last chain hit the ground. He did not look for acknowledgement. He did not wait for gratitude. His hands rested at his sides, calm, unremarkable, as if he had done nothing at all. The guards gathered the metal without comment, lifting it from the dirt with the same efficiency they had once used to secure it. But the sound was different now. Lighter. Temporary. Elsa drew in a slow breath, deeper than the ones before, though she did not realize it. The air felt the same. Dry. Warm. Carrying the faint scent of sunburned earth. And yet something inside it had changed. She lifted her foot, just slightly, then set it down again. No pull. No resistance. Her body adjusted in small, careful increments, relearning a movement it had not trusted for too long. She did not look at Jack. Not yet. Instead, her eyes moved across the open land beyond the fence line. It stretched farther than she could measure, uninterrupted, indifferent to the lines men had drawn within it. For the first time since stepping off the truck, she allowed herself to stand fully upright. Not forced. Not corrected. Simply upright. No one told her to do it. No one stopped her. And in that quiet space between instruction and action, something unfamiliar settled into place. Not relief. Not gratitude. Something steadier. Something that did not need to be named to be understood. Work began without announcement. No whistle. No command shouted across the field. Just movement, quiet and deliberate, as if everyone understood their place without needing to be told. The sun had climbed higher, pressing down with a steady weight that flattened shadows and stretched the horizon into something almost unreal. Elsa followed the others as they were guided toward the open rows beyond the fence line. The ground was dry beneath her boots, firm but uneven, each step carrying a new kind of awareness. Not cautious. Not restricted. Simply her own. A man handed her a canvas sack, worn at the edges, its weight light for now. She took it with both hands, her fingers adjusting to the rough fabric, the simple exchange happening without eye contact, without hesitation. No one checked her ankles. No one reminded her of rules she had already memorized. The absence of instruction felt louder than any order she had heard before. She stepped into the field, rows of cotton stretching out in long, straight lines that seemed to disappear into the distance. The plants stood waist-high, their leaves catching the sunlight, their white fibers soft against the harshness of the land. She reached out, almost instinctively, her hands remembering movements they had not used in this place before. The rhythm came slowly at first. Pull. Place. Step. Not perfect. Not practiced. But hers. Around her, the other women moved the same way, each adjusting in silence, their bodies finding balance without the weight that had defined them only minutes before. One of them paused, just briefly, as if expecting something to pull her back. Nothing did. She continued. Jack watched from a distance, leaning slightly against the fence post, his hat casting a shadow across his face. He did not supervise in the way officers did. He did not correct posture or pace. He simply observed, his presence steady, unintrusive, as if the work itself was enough to guide them. A breeze moved across the field, light but noticeable, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the quiet shift of fabric. Elsa felt it against her face, cool compared to the heat that surrounded them. She paused for a fraction of a second, not to rest, but to register it. The sensation of air moving freely. Nothing blocking it. Nothing containing it. She resumed her work, her movements a little smoother now, a little more certain. Time passed without markers. No clock. No bell. Only the steady progression of the sun and the growing weight of the sack at her side. Sweat gathered at her temples, tracing a slow path down her skin, familiar and expected. But there was something different in the way she carried it. Not endured. Not resisted. Accepted. A man walked past with a water container, offering it without words. She took a sip, the water warm but real, then handed it back with a small nod. No one rushed her. No one counted the seconds. When she stepped forward again, her posture remained straight, not forced into place, but chosen. The field continued to stretch ahead, unchanged, indifferent. But within it, something had shifted. Not in the land. Not in the work. In the way she moved through it. And for the first time since the war had begun to take everything apart, her steps did not feel like something being measured. They felt like something being returned. By midday, the heat settled into everything. It pressed into the soil, into the fabric of their clothes, into the slow rhythm of breath and movement that no longer needed to be forced. The sacks had grown heavier, their rough straps pulling against shoulders that had already learned not to complain. Elsa adjusted hers without stopping, a small shift, practiced, efficient. Her hands moved with more certainty now, the hesitation from earlier replaced by a quiet understanding of the task. Around her, the field carried the same steady motion, rows of figures bending and rising. Bending and rising, like a pattern that had existed long before any of them arrived. No one spoke. Not because they were forbidden. Because nothing needed to be said. The work itself filled the space. A cloud passed briefly overhead, softening the light for just a moment. Elsa noticed it without looking up. The change in temperature, slight but real, brushed across her arms. She slowed, just enough to feel it, then continued. These were things she had stopped noticing before. Small shifts. Subtle changes. The kind that only mattered when a person was no longer focused on what restrained them. A few rows over, one of the younger women straightened fully, her back arching slightly as if testing the limit of movement she had regained. She placed her hands at her sides, not in discipline, but in balance. No one corrected her. No one called her back into line. She lowered her arms on her own and returned to work, her pace unchanged, but something in her posture different. Less guarded. More certain. At the edge of the field, a truck idled quietly, its engine low, steady, a constant presence that did not interrupt the silence so much as exist within it. Jack remained nearby, though not always in view. Sometimes he stood by the fence. Sometimes he walked along the perimeter, boots steady against the dry ground, eyes moving across the field without urgency. He did not count. He did not measure output. He watched in a way that suggested he was looking for something else entirely. Not efficiency. Not discipline. Something harder to define. Elsa reached the end of her row and paused. Not out of fatigue, though it was there, settling into her shoulders, into her hands. She turned, looking down the line she had just completed. The cotton behind her had changed shape, gathered into the sack she carried, leaving the plants lighter, less burdened. She studied it for a moment, the quiet evidence of work done without resistance. Then she stepped into the next row. The motion was smooth. Uninterrupted. Her body no longer anticipating restriction. Time moved differently now. Not counted in minutes or orders, but in rows completed, in steps taken freely, in breaths that no longer caught in the chest before each movement. The sun began its slow descent, barely noticeable at first, the shadows lengthening by inches across the ground. A breeze returned, slightly stronger this time, carrying with it the distant sound of something metallic shifting near the truck. Elsa did not turn toward it. She did not need to. Whatever it was, it did not belong to her anymore. She continued forward, her pace steady, her steps even. Not hurried. Not slowed. Just her own. And in that quiet repetition, something settled deeper than relief. Not the absence of chains. The absence of waiting for them to return. Late afternoon settled over the field with a quieter kind of weight, less harsh than the noon sun but deeper, as if the day itself had begun to slow its breathing. The light shifted from white to something warmer, stretching long shadows between the rows of cotton. Elsa felt it before she saw it, the change in tone, the way the ground no longer reflected the same intensity back into her eyes. Her sack was nearly full now, the fabric pulling downward with a steady pressure that reminded her of effort, not restraint. She adjusted it once more, slower this time, not because she had to, but because she could choose when to pause. A whistle sounded in the distance, not sharp, not urgent, just a signal carried lightly across the open land. Movement in the field softened, not stopping all at once, but easing, as if each person reached the same understanding at a slightly different moment. Elsa finished the section in front of her before stepping out of the row. The transition felt natural, unforced, like closing a door that had never been locked. The women gathered loosely near the edge of the field, their spacing uneven, their posture no longer identical. One leaned slightly to one side, another rested her hands on her hips for a brief moment before letting them fall again. These were small things, almost invisible, but they had not existed that morning. A wooden crate sat beneath a wide oak tree nearby, its shade stretching outward in a soft, uneven circle. Water containers rested beside it, metal surfaces dulled by dust and use. Elsa walked toward them with the others, her steps steady, her pace her own. When she reached the shade, the temperature dropped just enough to notice. She exhaled slowly, the air cooler against her skin. A man handed her a tin cup. She accepted it with a slight nod, her fingers brushing the edge of the metal, warm from the day. The water inside was not cold, but it carried a different weight. She drank slowly, not out of urgency, but awareness. Around her, the same quiet continued. No one rushed. No one guarded the moment. A few of the women sat along the edge of the crate, their shoulders relaxing in ways they had not allowed themselves before. One removed her hat and placed it beside her, running her hand briefly through her hair before settling again. Another stretched her legs forward, boots resting flat against the ground, her posture open, uncontained. Elsa remained standing for a moment longer, then lowered herself onto the edge of the crate. The wood was rough beneath her, solid, unyielding, but not restrictive. She rested her hands loosely in her lap, fingers no longer curled inward. Her gaze moved across the field they had worked, the rows now marked by absence, by what had been gathered and carried away. It did not feel like loss. It felt like completion. Jack stood a short distance away, speaking quietly with one of the men, his voice low enough that the words did not carry. He did not look toward the group immediately. He did not check on them. His attention remained where it was, as if trust had already replaced the need for supervision. Elsa noticed this without focusing on it, the way one notices a shift in light rather than a specific object. It settled somewhere in her understanding, not as surprise, but as confirmation of something she had begun to feel earlier in the day. The wind moved again, stronger now, lifting small traces of dust into the air before letting them fall. It passed through the shade, through the stillness, through the space between people who no longer stood as they had that morning. Elsa placed the empty cup beside her and straightened slightly, not in response to instruction, but from within. The day was not over. But something within it had already reached its end. And nothing in the quiet around her suggested it would return. The break ended the way it had begun, without command, without urgency, as if the day itself had simply decided to continue. One by one they stood, not in formation, not aligned, just rising when they were ready. Elsa remained seated a moment longer than before, her hands resting loosely against her knees, her shoulders no longer carrying the same quiet tension. She listened not to voices, but to the absence of them. No orders. No counting. Only the low hum of the truck in the distance, and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. When she stood, it was without hesitation. The movement was smooth, unmeasured, belonging entirely to her. The field received them again, unchanged in its rows and distance, yet different in the way it was entered. Elsa stepped forward, crossing the same ground she had worked hours earlier, but the space no longer felt like something to pass through carefully. It felt open, continuous. She reached her row and resumed her work, her hands moving with a rhythm that had settled into something natural. Pull. Place. Step. The repetition no longer required thought. It allowed it. Her mind moved elsewhere, not far, just beyond the immediate task. She noticed the sound of her boots against the soil, steady and even. She noticed her breathing, deeper now, no longer interrupted by the expectation of resistance. She noticed the distance between each step, consistent, unbroken. These were small things. But they added up to something she had not felt in a long time. Continuity. A shadow moved across the edge of her vision. Jack walked along the far side of the field, his pace unhurried, his path not fixed to any particular line. He paused occasionally, not to inspect but to observe. When he stopped near her row, he did not step in. He remained just outside it, his presence close enough to be felt, not imposed. Elsa continued working, aware of him without looking directly. The space between them held no tension. Only awareness. After a moment he spoke, his voice quiet, carrying just enough to reach her without disturbing the stillness around them. You are keeping pace. The words were simple. Not praise. Not correction. Just an observation. Elsa paused, her hand resting lightly against the cotton plant before her. She did not answer immediately. Not because she did not understand. Because she chose when to respond. Then she gave a slight nod, her voice steady, her English careful but clear. Yes. It was the first word she had spoken since arriving that morning. It did not carry emotion. It did not need to. Jack nodded once in return, the exchange complete, requiring nothing more. He moved on without lingering, his steps carrying him further down the line, his attention shifting as naturally as it had come. Elsa resumed her work, but something within the rhythm had changed. Not the pace. Not the motion. The meaning. The work was no longer something done under watch. It was something done within a space that allowed it. The sun lowered further, its angle softening the edges of everything it touched. Shadows stretched longer, connecting rows that had once felt separate. The field seemed to breathe differently now, quieter, more open. Elsa reached the end of another row and turned without pause, her movement fluid, uninterrupted. She did not think about the chains. Not consciously. They had become something distant, not forgotten, but no longer present in the way she carried herself. And in that absence, something else had taken its place. Not freedom as a word, but freedom as a condition. Unspoken. Unclaimed. Simply lived. The light continued to shift, turning the field into something softer, less defined, as if the sharp edges of the day were being gently worn down by time itself. Elsa felt it in the way her eyes adjusted, no longer squinting against the brightness, but settling into the warmer tones that stretched across the land. The work slowed, not in effort, but in pace, each movement carrying a quiet completeness that had not been there before. The sacks filled more gradually now, the rhythm no longer driven by urgency, but by something steadier. Around her, the others moved the same way, no longer matching each other out of discipline, but finding their own timing within the same space. A bird crossed. Overhead, its shadow passing briefly over the rows, unnoticed by most, but Elsa felt the shift in light as it moved. She paused, just for a second, her hand resting lightly against the cotton, her breath steady. Then she continued, her motion uninterrupted, as if the pause had been part of the rhythm all along. At the far end of the field, the truck engine cut off, the sudden quiet settling in layers, revealing smaller sounds beneath it. The brush of fabric. The soft step of boots against dry soil. The faint creak of wood from the fence line. These sounds had always been there, but they had been hidden before, covered by something heavier. Now they surfaced clear, distinct, part of a space that no longer felt controlled, but shared. Elsa reached the end of her row once more and stopped, not out of habit, but intention. She turned, looking back across the field, the lines stretching out behind her in long, even paths. The work was visible now, not just in the filled sacks, but in the way the field itself had changed. Lighter. Open. She noticed one of the women a few rows over standing still, her sack resting on the ground beside her. She was not resting. She was looking out beyond the fence, her posture upright, her gaze fixed on something distant that could not be measured in yards or miles. No one called her back. No one marked the moment as unusual. It passed naturally, like a breath taken and released. Elsa stepped forward again, but slower this time, not because she was tired, but because she no longer felt the need to match any pace but her own. The sun dipped lower, casting a deeper gold across everything it touched. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the rows, blending the spaces between them into something continuous. Jack moved along the edge of the field once more, his silhouette outlined by the lowering light. He paused near the gate, resting one hand against the wood, his gaze moving across the workers, not counting, not measuring, just witnessing. Elsa noticed him briefly, her eyes meeting his for a fraction of a second. There was no signal exchanged. No acknowledgement required. The moment passed without weight, without expectation. She turned back to her work, her hands moving with quiet precision. The day was nearing its end, but it did not feel like something closing. It felt like something settling into place. The kind of ending that does not announce itself, but arrives quietly, leaving behind a space that feels different without needing to explain why. Elsa placed another handful into her sack and adjusted the strap on her shoulder, her movements smooth, unforced. The field stretched ahead, unchanged in distance, but transformed in meaning. And for the first time, the space between where she stood and where she would go next did not feel like something to be crossed carefully. It felt like something already open. The final call of the day did not come as a command, but as a shift that everyone seemed to feel at once. The light had lowered enough that the field no longer held its sharp definition, edges softening, colors deepening into tones that belonged more to evening than to work. Elsa slowed her movement, not stopping, just allowing the rhythm to taper naturally. Her hands placed the last gathered cotton into the sack, then rested there for a moment, feeling the weight settle into its final shape. Around her, the others reached the same quiet conclusion, each finishing their row in their own time, their steps no longer aligned, but no longer needing to be. The field exhaled. No signal was given, yet the work ended. Elsa stepped out of her row and adjusted the strap from her shoulder, easing the pressure with a small, practiced motion. She lifted the sack and carried it toward the edge of the field, her pace steady, her posture unchanged. The ground beneath her feet felt different now, not because it had changed, but because she moved across it without hesitation, without the subtle calculation that had once defined every step. At the collection point, the sacks were placed in a loose line, not stacked with precision, not arranged by order, simply set down where they reached their end. Elsa lowered hers carefully, her hands releasing the fabric without rush. For a moment, she stood there, her arms at her sides, the absence of weight noticeable in a way that was not physical alone. It was the kind of lightness that did not come from rest, but from completion. Nearby, one of the women turned slowly in place, as if testing the space around her, her gaze moving across the open land beyond the fence. She took a few steps without direction, not wandering, just walking, her path unmarked, uncorrected. No one called her back. No one asked where she was going. She stopped on her own, turning again toward the others, her movement quiet, self-contained. Elsa watched this without focusing on it, the moment settling into her awareness without needing explanation. Jack approached the group from the far side, his pace even, his presence steady as it had been throughout the day. He did not gather them. He did not address them. He simply stopped a short distance away, his gaze moving across the women, not in inspection, but in acknowledgement. The silence held. Not empty. Full. The kind that comes when nothing more needs to be said. A breeze moved through the area, cooler now, carrying the first hints of evening across the field. Elsa felt it against her skin, different from the wind earlier, softer, more deliberate. She drew in a slow breath, deeper than before, her chest rising fully, without interruption. She did not look down at her feet. She did not think about the ground beneath them. She did not think about what had been removed. She simply stood. Around her, the others began to move back toward the truck, not in formation, not directed, just walking. Elsa followed after a moment, her steps even, unmeasured. The truck waited where it had been all day, unchanged, its presence familiar but no longer defining. As she approached, she placed one foot onto the step and lifted herself up without pause. No chain adjusted her movement. No weight pulled her back. She entered the truck and took her place among the others, sitting without the careful positioning that had once been necessary. The engine started again, low and steady, the sound filling the space without breaking it. As the truck began to move, the field drifted slowly behind them, rose fading into distance, the work of the day remaining where it had been left. Elsa sat upright, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her gaze forward. Nothing in her posture suggested change. And yet everything in it had already changed. The truck moved slowly along the dirt road, its tires pressing shallow tracks into the dry surface, the sound steady, almost rhythmic, like a continuation of the day rather than a departure from it. Dust lifted behind them in a soft trail, catching the last light of the sun before settling back into the ground. Elsa sat without shifting, her posture upright, her hands resting loosely against her lap, fingers relaxed in a way that no longer required effort. Around her, the other women sat in quiet stillness, their bodies no longer held in the same careful alignment they had carried earlier. One leaned slightly against the wooden side of the truck, another rested her hands behind her for balance, small adjustments that spoke not of fatigue, but of choice. The air had cooled just enough to be noticed, moving across their faces with a softness that had not been present in the morning. Elsa turned her head slightly, her gaze following the line of the field as it slipped further away, the rows now blending into one continuous stretch of land, their details no longer sharp, but still visible in memory. The work remained there, in the ground, in the sacks left behind, in the quiet order that had replaced what had once been tension. She did not hold on to it. She did not need to. The truck passed the fence line, the wooden posts moving by in steady intervals, each one marking a boundary that no longer felt the same. Beyond them, the land opened wider, uninterrupted, carrying the same vastness she had first seen when she arrived, but now understood differently. It was not something distant. It was something real. The engine continued its low hum, constant, unchanging, a sound that no longer filled the silence, but existed within it. Elsa adjusted her position slightly, not to relieve discomfort, but because she could. Her foot shifted, her heel pressing lightly against the floor of the truck, no resistance meeting it. The movement was small. It did not need to be more. Across from her, one of the women lifted her hand and let it rest against the edge of the truck, her fingers trailing briefly along the wood as the vehicle moved. She was not holding on. She was feeling it. The motion. The continuity. The simple fact of movement without interruption. No one spoke. Not because they were unable. Because words would have reduced something that did not require explanation. The truck turned slightly, the angle of the light changing once more, casting longer shadows across the interior. Elsa closed her eyes for a brief moment, not in rest, but in recognition. The day had passed without resistance. Not because it had been easy. Because something within it had shifted in a way that removed the need for it. When she opened her eyes again, the camp came into view ahead, its structures outlined against the fading sky. Familiar. Unchanged. And yet not the same. The truck slowed, then came to a stop, the engine idling for a moment before quieting completely. One by one, the women stood, not in sequence, not waiting for instruction, simply rising when they chose. Elsa followed, stepping toward the edge, placing her foot down onto the ground below with the same steady motion she had used throughout the day. No hesitation. No adjustment. Just a step. She moved forward with the others, her pace even, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze level. The space around her did not press in. It did not demand. It simply existed. Behind her, somewhere back along the road, the sound of metal resting in the bed of the truck remained, unmoving and used. It did not follow her. It did not define her. Elsa continued walking, her steps quiet against the ground, each one carrying the same unspoken truth. She had not asked for anything. She had not resisted. She had not proven herself. And yet something had been given. Not loudly. Not ceremonially. Simply and completely. And she carried it the only way she knew how. By walking forward as if it had always been hers.